Hey, everybody. We are here to explore the narrative and how we can use that to create and complete our narrative bases, right? So, where do we begin? We start by, and you will start by, I think, even after this, is going and considering composition. Composition based on narratives, or another word for that is storytelling formats, right? And keeping it simple. Within our context, within the small bases that we're making, we're going to need to keep it simple. So we're riffing off the Greeks, right? The whole Greek heritage, which culminated in the classical Greeks. And we started sort of with the Minoans and have worked through the Mycenaeans, at least seeing their work. But there's work from all over the world that has interesting shapes. Here's a really great example of piercing, right? And adding sculpture to the outside. Interesting and different examples of handles, different examples of formats of these pieces. One of my favorite pieces, I was mesmerized by this in China recently. And anyways, it goes around, and this represents the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. So anyways, just crazy examples, not only from Greece, but from around the world. And you might want to look and just see what you find. They're all over. Every culture has them. The world is rich with historical references based on ceramics because it's lasted. So here's where we are now. You have this. They're not together yet, but you have a neck, you have a foot, and you have a rim, and you're going to put them in a composition, and then you're going to decorate those. But you need to also remember that these can have movement, right? So, for example, things can tip and move a little bit and have a sway to them, right? Like you see here. But you're also then going to put some kind of a narrative, some kind of a storyline. And it can either be one side and the other, or it can go all the way around. As you see here, with our examples from Greece, like the different myths or the different displays of technology and daily life, which kind of give us an insight into the structure of society, into the ruling classes, into royalty, all that kind of stuff. But we're not Greeks. So what are some other, examples? There's lots of them, right, in general. And how do we create examples that apply more to our lives? That's the point here. We're riffing off the Greeks and off narratives from around the world, but we want to figure out for ourselves. Well, in general, a narrative is a poignant moment, which is kind of a frozen instant, implying a continuum of a sort of before and after, and perhaps a sense of universal relevance. Just as you can see, the title of this piece is also the title of Rian Eisler's book. Anyways, the idea here is to keep it simple. In this example of not keeping it simple, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, but for what we're doing in the relatively small pieces that we're making, this composition is just a little too complicated. And you might have and know a lot of compositions you think, this is just the most amazing. What you'll have to do is go into those and figure out how to take an aspect of them and make them more simple. Like was done here. Even still, this might be a little too complicated, right? Hundreds of hours of work to draw and carefully render this. But same thing here. A crazy cool composition, but way too complicated for our purposes. But if you break it down, and you break down any narrative compositions, or most, by looking at its foreground, what's at the front, what comes way up at you, what's at the middle ground, and then what's at the background. And then within that, there's also usually, you can delineate and sort of set apart subdominant compositions. I mean, look at the complexity here, right? All the stuff going on. Here it looks like American Gothic, right? Here it looks like something by Magritte. Here it looks like, another thing by Homer. These are really cool. I mean, there's so much going on, but you have to really look and look at the subdominant compositions to be able to get all of this. All right, so that's one idea. A tip is to find your composition, like break it down into more simple compositions or compositions, right? And that can be easily read within our format. This doesn't mean at some point you don't do crazy complex compositions, but right now we're trying to simplify. So here's another example of a composition I was particularly moved by. I spent a lot of time, went back several times to see. It's in Arizona, in Phoenix, and it's by a Hispanic artist whose work is just incredible, and it just kind of typifies all of such a broad sweep of Hispanic culture. And I mean, here's this contemporary man surrounded by the past, surrounded by elements of his past, of his heritage. Here's a woman, standing at the foot of the cross, but there's an indigenous woman here, kind of a little suspect about that. And I mean, you can see the impact of Spain on the indigenous peoples in America. There's so many subtexts, so many sub-stories going on within this huge composition. And that might be one strategy for you to look. So what can be expressed in any one narrative, and ours that we're going to keep fairly simple? Just about anything, even in a simple composition. For example, Frida Kahlo, quite a, wow, what a powerhouse of a woman and of an artist, right? But her life was filled with pain. She had a really dramatic accident at an early age, at 16, and it dramatically affected her spinal cord, and she eventually died from that. So a lot of her art has to do with the constant pain she was through, and also the psychological pain she experienced through relationships and other losses, and also the kind of dual realities that she experienced being a woman in Mexico, and particularly the guy she was married to, who is, an amazing artist and an incredible muralist, but he was pretty hard on the people around him. Talk about a complicated composition, right? You can see this work off the Zocalo in Mexico, as you can many of them, as you can find murals here in San Francisco by Diego Rivera. But they are really, when you go see them, they're understandable because it's in a huge public context. But they are so complicated. It's like looking at the Sistine Chapel. I mean, it's almost too much. You have to break it down in order to look at any one piece. But this, if you do break it down, any one of the compositions are just amazing. And the topics are things like heritage and heroism, or social inequities, right? Or class confrontation, or revolution. And these are all topics that both Frida and Diego were very much parts of their lives. But there are all sorts of other topics. I mean, that's, from the 1930s and very specific, right? You can also think about other, things that are more universal, like Edward Munch on despair, or interconnections, here, M.C. Escher, or The Exotic with Paul Gauguin, or on what composes our core. This is a Mesoamerican piece that just intrigues me. Or Grant Wood on romanticizing culture and the values of this culture, like Stoic resolve, right? Or questioning the values of that culture or any culture. And I'll show you an example of my own work, which, it tends to do that. Sometimes it's a little serious, but here's one piece that I made not too long called Woke, right? Kind of a catchword these days. But anyways, there's the front and the back, and there's a haiku around the bottom, and I like to add words and poems and things, so I'll let you read this on your own, and you can pause if you want. But it also deals with my implication in the values of my own culture and whether or not I perpetuate those. So anyways, that's an idea. Now we're going to be working, there's the body, there's the foot, there's the rim, there's the handles. You don't need to put a rim on it or a lid, and you don't need to make a base for it. I'm just showing you as a matter of perspective. But there are also more light-hearted approaches. Art can be serious. So this is also serious. Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. The man is the measure of all things, or human beings is the measure of all things. The code of humanism, right? But Robert Arneson, who we'll talk about in the next unit, the father of funk, really had a sense of humor about himself and about many things in society. And he also explored those issues and his sense of humor related to them from many angles, which was kind of admirable, I think. Anyways, William Blake, the poet from the 1900s, and his ideas about drama and spirituality, right? I mean, really romanticizing those things. Or notions of patriotism, like you see here. Or, as in Norman Rockwell's, there's stereotypes of him as only dealing with the perceived values of American culture. In other words, almost propaganda. And I always thought that, but I've changed my mind about him in the last few years as I've seen more of his work. I always thought he was just about this kind of thing, which romanticized values and things that were kind of a little bit cliche. But I realized how much other work he made, which was very poignant, like the challenges to those values. And also, most specifically, pieces like this were very edgy about racism and extremism, right? Notice how all these perpetrators of this horrid event, which actually happened, are all in shadow. Anyways, the world without end, unfortunately. Anyways, so what are examples of recent ceramic narratives and what you might look? Beatrice Woods, what an incredible woman, lived to be 115. She's not necessarily all that recent, but you can still go see her studio in Ojai and much of her work. But her life, she didn't start making ceramics till she was like 50 or something, and she is most known for it, and most known for it because she used it as a narrative to explore her identity as a woman, and sometimes way before her time, right? Another person that whose narrative is interesting, Patty Worshina, who deals with issues of stereotypes of ethnicity, being a Japanese woman, right, and how that has played. Or Shailene Valenzuela on dealing on gender stereotypes, usually putting them on accoutrements of the kitchen and on purses and things like that, all of which are stereotypically just for women. Ryan Hurst, who's up in Humboldt, and his work deals with political nuance, but quite often with this, a sense of humor, a little bit like this one here, Rioters at the Gate, which, one of the big perpetrators or one of the big threats here is Cookie Monster, kind of funny, but also kind of sweeping and more serious political things like, timeless armadas here. There's a historical armadas like we see, from the Spanish or going way back to like the Minoans, but also here's the more contemporary. So anyways, he likes to see it. One thing that repeats in his work, and this is a narrative, but it's not necessarily showing people doing anything, but media overload and manipulation that wraps around the pot. And he paints his pots black and then scrapes away to create this, and that's an option for you, just so you know. And the black slip that we have available in the studio is something that you could use to do this. Painting it all black first and then going on to do other things. Kurt Weiser, wow. His ideas about human interaction with nature, right, as narratives, he's always been a big hero of mine. Or Michael Fremkes' work is, for the most part, not serious at all. It has to do with cartoons and not crazy serious, having to do with popular culture, and mostly lighthearted things, that are positive to him, and everyday scenarios. And affirmations of nature, right? That scene could be one of those that we looked at as a depiction from Minoan Creed, right? But also, every now and then there is something serious. Here's a depiction of American culture and Uncle Sam, but then there's Santa Claus. Okay, but Santa Claus as Hitler. So I don't know what he was thinking there, but Michael Fremkes' work is, interesting and mostly just kind of funny. Here's another piece of mine, just to show you as far as the creating abbreviated compositions. Here's a front and a back side of the same piece, kind of like not necessarily kind of stark contrast, and then a haiku, right? And then there's a top piece on it too. Anyways, some pieces of mine. This was a riot that I saw, and in my sort of recollections of that in Budapest. I think I talked about it in our meet and greet, and also a piece that's a haiku that it's up in a series 1, 2, and 3, and each of them have an image that the words depict in the 3 parts of the haiku, and also they are each based on a historical painting, as you see here, or as you see here, right? All right, and also a historical piece by Picasso that I found interesting, and this piece here that I think is probably based on this with the tattoos and on the attitude of this young woman. All right, my last person that I'm going to talk about is Kevin Snipes. He's one of my heroes because I think he explores anime and the joyful commonplace, the enigmatic, as well as the subtle and not so subtle, erotic nature of hipster culture, in his opinion. Anyways, I just think his work is really fascinating, and he's one of the most upcoming new artists. He also explores his own racial identity, which I think is a very interesting, it's interesting and it's uplifting and it's just really fun work. Anyways, those are a bunch of examples. I hope that you look at all of them, and you can go back and freeze on them, but I also hope that you go out and look at other things. You can also get an idea about how he explores his pieces, right? Okay, no more. I think that's plenty for now, and bye.